So it's been an interesting transition for Sony going from last generation with the PlayStation 4 to the current generation with the PS5. In fact, some people still call this system that's been out for almost 2 years now the next gen console. It's a weird thing, right? But if you consider how obvious and front and center the PS4 has remained, really with third-party developers and even Sony, it's hard not to have to make that distinction for the PS5, and it doesn't look like that's going to be changing much anytime soon, as the PS4, well, we could still be seeing that logo on some of these trailers, even from Sony, for the next couple of years. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawnwave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Let's head over here. This is posted up by Push Square. There were several interviews that were done by Herman Hulst, who is the head at PlayStation Studios, mostly in charge of managing all these different developers that Sony has currently between a wide range of studios. And in some of these interviews, he talked about many things when it came to their strategy overall with these different studios, and really some of their different avenues of game releases and where they can look to build revenue. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in Newswave, but for now, I wanted to focus in on his comments for that PlayStation 4 system. He says, "We certainly don't want to forget the millions of active players on PS4, and we want to ensure that there are great games for them as well. We're evaluating it on a case-by-case basis." And this was mostly brought up because the cross-gen period, specifically for Sony, is very strange right now because it's not typical for them. For third parties, it is. Third parties will support that PS4 or that PS3 or PS2, wherever, as long as possible because there's still a large player base there. They're not in charge of getting people to buy the next system. They just develop games wherever there are people who will buy from them. To a certain degree, it has to be enough people. Obviously, like, you didn't see Capcom looking at the Ouya and they were like, we gotta get the next Street Fighter on that system. But for the big three, typically you'll see some developers and studios even create specific games for it, like the Switch not getting Street Fighter 6, but gets something like Monster Hunter Rise. In this case, though, the PS4 is relevant still for them to create games. And if you think about it, there are still many that will be going there into 2023. Exoprimal, that's one from Capcom. We have Resident Evil 4 Remake, which was announced after it had already been announced for things like the PS5 and the Xbox Series, and kind of led all of us to believe that Resident Evil 4 Remake was specifically set for this generation, the new hardware with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series. Street Fighter 6 will be on the PS4. Then we also have Diablo 4. Diablo 4, Exoprimal, even Street Fighter. You would kind of consider these as live service games, one that will require support for years to come. And that's kind of what the biggest thing is here. How long will the PlayStation 4 be supported and be in this cross-generation period? Typically, I feel like most people look at the cross-gen time as being maybe 2 years at the most. And then you kind of expect there to be enough systems that have sold through for the new hardware for a lot of developers to just start honing in on that and focusing for what would be new development cycles that would be another 3 to 4 years before we see those games. In this case, it seems like even Sony, who has been off to a slow start with the PlayStation 5 in terms of sales, all things considered, because there were issues outside of their control with the chip shortage and just the inability to meet demand for this platform, has kind of had them sit back a bit, have some pause of just jumping straight to the PS5. That's what they would do with their other systems, like the PS3 to the PS4, clean break from that. The PS2 to the PS3, same deal. When it came to the first-party studios with Sony, they immediately jumped to the new hardware because it was their job to sell it with these big-time exclusive games. In this case, though, they have God of War coming up in a month, which looks great, but that will also be on the PS4. And now we're hearing Herman Hulst talk about how they'll probably be releasing PS4 games in 2023 from their first-party studios. And I'm curious if any of these live service games end up having a PS4 version that we should see Sony start to announce some of these live service games soon. They have like 10 or 12 of them in development or something, and they're going to have many of these releasing over the next 5 years. You probably want to get the ball rolling on that, I would say in the next couple of months. But you have to remember, live service games typically have a long tail of support. In this case, if there is a PS4 version announced for the Horizon multiplayer, we'll say, that's something that might be supported into 2026, maybe 2027. This could be a multi-year project for them, 3 or 4 years. Could we really see the PS4 have support from Sony themselves in 2026? I guess it's possible. If I had to look at this and just try to come up with a time where most developers would move on from the last-gen hardware, I would think 2024 would be the last year for it. But to be honest, I wouldn't be shocked if we're right back here, September or October of 2024, and we're talking about how the PS4 still won't go away and we could see it next year into 2025. But certainly some interesting comments here from Sony. The biggest thing they can do to get really this cross-gen period over is just sell more PS5s, and I think they're going to have a pretty good holiday. It sounds like they're having no issue in development right now in production for the PSVR 2 based on a new report from Bloomberg, and it sounds like that is also bleeding over to the PS5 to where production has ramped up for the system. I think you're going to see the PS5 in stock very frequently throughout the holidays, especially on that PlayStation Direct website. It will probably be the Horizon bundle. We've already established that that's the way that Sony has worked to really raise the price on the PS5 in the US without actually saying we've raised the price. They just bundled it together, and they have lowered cost to produce the PS5. All of this working in tandem so that they can create more systems, and the fact that probably in the next couple of months we're going to see the PSVR 2 release. They will work, I would say, over the next 6 months to accelerate development and production of the PS5 platform, which means that, I don't know, by next year there may be enough to just have a complete clean break from the PS4 and all hands on deck for the PS5. So that's all I can think of there. And the reason you're going to hear this cross-gen stuff come up more and more as we get into 2023 is because if you look at the PS4, yeah, if you have to develop for it, you're also keeping that mechanical hard drive in mind, which I still think is the biggest upgrade, is going to just an all solid-state platform with the PS5. Very fast solid-state that's in there. But then you look back on that 5,400 RPM drive for the PS4. There are limitations there that you have to keep in mind, and well, it's frustrating to see that, yeah, you could have software being held back because of a system from 2013 with those limitations. But here's hoping Sony can continue to ramp up production of the PS5, and maybe going into 2024 we can start seeing what the PS5 is capable of. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. How long do you think the PS4 is going to be supported specifically from Sony's first-party developers? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.